Alrighty, so we are here. We are going to talk about skeleton blurbs. What I thought I would do today is I'm going to talk about first about skeleton blurbs, and then if anybody wants to share theirs, I'm happy to talk about it, and I'll turn the recording off at that point so we can have a private discussion about that if you would like. No pressure. It's just kind of a fun thing to do live. So can you type a yes in the chat if this is the first time you're hearing about the Fictionary skeleton blurb? Okay, so we've got a few people here who haven't heard about the Fictionary skeleton blurb. So I'm going to talk about that first and give you some guidelines. We're going to talk a little bit about the Hunger Games and different ways that we can write a skeleton blurb. I just picked that one because it's so clear and lots of people know the story either from reading it or from seeing it on, I don't know, a movie or Netflix or wherever people watch things these days. So let me just close this. I've got my chat up. I'm going to open the app and show you where the blurb is in the Fictionary app first, and then I'm going to talk around it. So let's have a look at the app. Now, Maria, I can see you at the top of my screen. Can you just nod if you're seeing your story editing journey? Excellent. Thank you. Sometimes I talk away and there's nothing on the screen. So this is very helpful. Okay, so this is in the app, and this is the overall story editing journey. It's meant for when you're at the editing phase. So if you're outlining or writing, you can kind of follow this process too if you want, but you certainly don't have to. So there's two ways to get at a skeleton blurb within Fictionary, and one is on this page here, and you can just click over here and add your story blurb. And the other way to do it is to come up to the journey and click story blurb here. Either way works fine. It goes to the same place. It doesn't matter if one is different than the other. Now, I just want to find my chat to make sure if people are asking questions, I can see it, which I can't. So if you want to ask a question, just come off mute and interrupt me. Alrighty, so let's talk about what is a skeleton blurb. So it's a very simple statement about, sorry, my puppy's at my foot here. It's a very simple statement of what your book is about from the highest level. So it's got three parts to it. One is the protagonist, the other is the story goal, and the other is the story stakes. And so what this shows us, there we go. Now I found my chat. Whew, okay. So if we look at the protagonist, we'll talk about that first. So here you pick your protagonist. These are the characters that are in the cast of characters page. If you don't have any characters listed, if you're outlining, you can go to the cast of characters page, which is up under journey, and just add a character so you have it. So in this book, Shannon Payne is the protagonist. So let's talk about protagonist just for a minute. So protagonist is just your who is this story about? So you can have three types of protagonists. You can have a single protagonist where the story is one person's story, like Katniss Everdeen. She's the protagonist of the Hunger Games. You can have a combined protagonist where all this means is you have two characters. Quite often this happens in a romance novel. The Wedding Date is a great example of that by Jasmine Guillory, where the two love interests are a combined protagonist, in which case you put both their names in the cast of characters and select them as one. The next thing you have here is you enter a story goal. And so the story goal is, what is that protagonist trying to do? And in this story, Shannon Payne is trying to find out who killed her uncle. And that's her goal for the book. And it's very simple. She may have other goals. At the beginning, it starts out a little different, but this is her end goal, what she wants to achieve in the climax scene. Then you have your story stakes, and if she doesn't find out, in this case, we'll put she might die. There could be other consequences, whatever fits for your book. And the stakes are just what happens if the protagonist doesn't achieve their story goal. That's it. And here, they might achieve it or they might not, depending on the story that you're writing. That's totally up to you with your story. This is just to give you your one-line sentence of what your story is about. And here, this will guide you. So when you're outlining, you're looking at this to go, okay, does every scene, and I mean every scene in the story, does it help or does it hinder your protagonist reaching the story goal? And even if the protagonist isn't in the scene, they might know that something, not know that something has helped or hindered them. They still have to, there still has to be something in there for them. And so when you're writing, same thing, keep it in mind. And it's a good thing when you start to go off track with the scene, you know, how we all get carried away with writing our scenes, then you might want to just take a look at your story blurb. And you can see it's down at the bottom here on the screen right here. It'll always be there. And it will always be up in the journey if you just want to click the blurb in the journey. So you can always remind yourself. Eva, I see your hand up. Feel free to come off mute and interrupt me, and I will be happy to answer a question.
How do you edit that if you put one in there and you wanted to change it?
That's a
Do you
great
go back up to
question.
journey?
You can, yep, you go back up to journey and here, I'll just click out. So you can go to journey, and then over here, do you see where it says story blurb? You just click that, and then you click this little pencil, and you can do whatever you want here. And that's a really, really important point, because as you outline or write, you're going to find you change this, or maybe you want to fine tune it. And so you come back here, you can change it at any time. The thing to know about the story blurb, it's for you. Nobody else. This is not something, unless you want to share it with your editor or a beta reader or whatever, that's fine, but you don't have to. This is for you only to use as a tool while you're working on your book. And it always reminds you and brings you back. And when you're looking at things like purpose of a scene, for example, you look at that purpose, you look at your blurb, and you think, does it help or hinder the protagonist achieve their story goal, that scene? And so if we look at a story with multiple points of view, so if we pick a thriller, Jason Bourne, he is the protagonist. He's trying to find out who he is. The antagonist is the government. And so there's scenes from their point of view, and they'll do things that make it harder or easier for Jason to find out who he is. So he doesn't actually have to be in the scene. He doesn't know what they're doing. It's for you as the author to control the story. It's not for the reader at this point. This is just for you. And to me, I don't know how anyone writes a book without it. It's my favorite tool. So can you type a yes in the chat if you are familiar with the Hunger Games? Have read it, have seen the story, generally know the story? Okay, yes. Okay, good. So everybody kind of knows the story. So if we look at the story blurb or skeleton blurb for the Hunger Games, a very simple one is Katniss must win the Hunger Games, otherwise she dies. And this is for book 1 only. That's her goal. For the series, she has a different skeleton blurb, and that is Katniss must lead the revolution and overturn the Capitol. Otherwise, everyone she knows will either die or live a life of misery. And so it's a much bigger goal and stakes, but book 1 is just she's got to survive. So as the author, she might have come up with something different. So she might have said, Katniss must learn to kill others, otherwise she'll lose the Hunger Game and she dies. So maybe that's how the author wants to go through it, because she wants to develop Katniss as a person who's never killed anybody to she has to. And maybe that's how she's going to focus her scenes. Or she could write, Katniss must leverage her hunting skills to kill otherwise she loses the Hunger Games and she dies. So you can tailor that goal to how you want to see the character grow over the book, and then you can use it to remind yourself to put little hints in. So can anyone come up with another way for the Hunger Games of what could be a goal for her? I mean, the stakes are pretty clear. She dies if she loses. She must fight in the Hunger Games for her sister. Yes, and that's why she joined. So that's another way. And that's a really good one, because that's interesting. In the final book, of course, okay, spoiler alert, don't listen if you don't want to know, but her sister dies. And her whole thing at the very beginning is to save her sister. That's why she volunteers. So it's a big fail at the end, right? And so that knowing that before you start is great because you can tailor the book to keep bringing Prim in so the reader knows and understands how much Katniss cares about it and how devastating it is for her when she can't save her sister. Okay, then we have from Carla, Katniss must learn to navigate the Hunger Games arena, otherwise she might die. And that is really good also because in book 2 in particular, it comes into play that she learns how to navigate the Hunger Games with the clock is in book 2, where she figures out the bad things are happening at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and she can outrun it or move to the other side. And so that's another way to keep track of it. And it's super helpful when you start thinking about the goals in the skeleton blurb as what's important to you, the author, that you want to have come out. And you might even find you have more than one version. And I'm going to show you where to store those in case you have, you kind of want to wait till you're really done. But you could also kind of tailor the books that you have one in mind. You think, well, maybe that one's more applicable to book 2. Let's hold on that one, like happens in the Hunger Games in book 2. Then we have Katniss must foster support from XXX, otherwise she will lose the Hunger Games and die. And that's another one. She's been a loner. She has one friend where she comes from, and now she has to find other people like Rue. At the middle plot point, she joins forces with Rue to work together. So that's another one that totally works for the Hunger Games. So you can see the flexibility of the skeleton blurb. And so back to Marie's question of can you change it, update it? Absolutely. You probably will. Terry says she has to learn who to trust and not trust in order to survive. And that's another way. So she doesn't know in there, right? Whether she could even trust Peeta, who's her main counterpart through the entire series. She has no idea at the beginning. And there's quite a few hints in this book as she goes through that she doesn't trust Peeta and she thinks he really just wants to kill her. She has no idea at the beginning he's in love with her and really doesn't want to kill her and will die for her. So that's an interesting twist on this story too. So if we look in here and we go back to the story blurb, down here you can type a full blurb. So when you're getting close to publication, you can use your skeleton to write a full blurb. But what I like to do while I'm still working is in here, I put what my optional blurbs are. So I keep track. Every time I think of a new one, I put the old one down here and I put the new one up here. And so this will be my most recent one. And then I keep them here. And it reminds you, these are things that you were interested in your story so that you can keep your story on track. So now if we look at the evaluate page, so in here, the most important things with the skeleton blurb is this one, the purpose of scene, which I haven't filled out. But when you're choosing your purpose of scene, you have lots of options. You can select pre-written ones, or you can add one. And, for example, if it's you want to drive her, I'm just going to put away from goal, just to keep it simple. You can add a new one here. You can also set your story arc scenes. So let's just go and have a look at the story arc. So in here, this is the general story arc. So let's say I don't want this. I read my scene. I think that's not really my plot point 1. It doesn't make sense. Plot point 1 is where she accepts the story goal. So this has to be about the story goal. I can go and update here. So let's say I know my plot point 1 is really, I don't know, dog overboard. We'll just make it up. Doesn't matter. And then I click confirm and you'll see that my story arc has redrawn for me. So when you're using your skeleton blurb, you know the goal. So right off the bat, plot point 1 is where the protagonist accepts the story goal. And that's how you find your plot point 1 in the story. If you haven't purposefully written it, then you look at your plot point 1, or you look through your story kind of between 20 and 30%. And I bet there's a scene in there where the protagonist accepts the story goal. And that is your plot point 1. And that's the easiest one to go and find based on your skeleton blurb. And here, Um, what I would do if I had moved that, so it was out here somewhere. I don't remember exactly what scene, but I would go and look at the word count, because if Fictionary pulls out a scene that's not your story arc scene, it's probably because there's a word count imbalance, meaning some other scene that's not a story arc scene has a really high word count and the story arc scene doesn't. And so there could be an imbalance. The reader will see the other scene as more important than this scene. The next thing you do with the skeleton blurb is you look at your climax scene. You go, well, is this the climax scene? Yes or no? And you can do the same thing. You can do a quick update and say, nope, it's really scene 89, and it's going to redraw it. And the way you test, is it your climax scene? Oh, look, it drew it perfectly there. Isn't that nice? The way you test is, again, you look at your story goal, and if this scene doesn't answer the story goal, so did the protagonist clearly achieve or not achieve it, it's not the climax scene. It has to be related to that. And this is important. It's very easy to write an awesome climax scene. And I edited a book once where the story was about saving a girl, and the climax scene was this great battle, but didn't answer that question. So it's not the climax. It has to answer the question, did the protagonist achieve the story goal or not? That's it. And so those two plot points are really easy to find and confirm and test against your skeleton blurb. And when you update your skeleton blurb, you want to go back and double check. You just click on, any of these. You can read the scene and go, does this scene do what I need it to do? Right? And so in the inciting incident, the protagonist gets a shakeup in their world, and that has to be related to the story goal. That in this book we're looking at, Look the Other Way, the main character gets fired. So that could be the inciting incident, but only if it's going to lead her to plot point 1. If not, it's not the inciting incident. There has to be something else. So it's got to be related. Then we go out to plot point 2, which does two things. One is it puts the protagonist at their lowest point in the story. And here, they should be far away from the story goal. Or at least it has to look like they're far away. You want the reader to really second guess whether they can achieve their story goal or not. So it comes right back to the story goal. They also get their final piece of information they need to reach the climax. So you can look for that in here, and that can be like the scene before or the scene after plot point 2. It's not as critical, but it's somewhere in this point. And then I always do the middle plot point last because that's the hardest in my opinion. So the protagonist moves from reactive to proactive. And all that means is between plot point 1 and the middle plot point. So the protagonist has accepted their goal that's in the skeleton blurb. Between here and here, they're actively reacting to things. So something happens, they react. Something happens, they react. And they keep going through the story. When they get to around the middle, they're going to start driving it. And so they start planning and thinking. So the middle plot point, usually they get a piece of information. It can be a false victory, a false defeat, so that they go in the wrong direction, because you want them to get to this plot point 2, where they're at their lowest at the low and farthest away from the story goal. So here they're trying to achieve the story goal, but they're usually off track. And then as they go through the story, of course, once they get past here, they're going to start hopefully succeed, but maybe not if it's a tragedy. So here, the difference is they're not reacting to the scenes. They're actively driving the story. They're making decisions. They're doing things that move the story forward. And that's the only difference between here and here. Is here they're reacting to try and achieve the story goal. And here they're actively driving the story goal. So you can kind of see how important the skeleton blurb is, because everything comes back to the story goal. And then when we look at tension, we look at in the stakes, what's at stake if the protagonist doesn't achieve their goal. And as they go through the story and they get farther and farther away from their story goal and things look really bad, the tension goes up and up and up and up because it's looking worse for them. And you look back at the stakes to see Where are you reminding your reader throughout the story that these are the stakes? What's the protagonist worried about? What frightens them? What are they going to lose? And that's how you keep tension in the story, is by really keeping track of what the stakes are and reminding the reader what the stakes are so they feel that tension too. Okay, is there anyone here who was in the fantasy course last week? Type a yes in the chat for me if you were. Oh, Linda was. Linda. Oh, Krim was, yeah. Oh, KT was fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording